It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News live from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, where tonight large explosions sounded as night fell on this city. A series of blasts hit major cities in Ukraine, killing dozens as the Russian assault on this country intensifies. In Kyiv's main hospital, children's hospital, Sky News witnesses children being treated for gunshot wounds as doctors move cancer patients to the basement. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia held on the Belarus border while a war of words erupts between them at the United Nations. Western sanctions begin to bite as the UK government ratchets up their response, directing all ports to deny access to Russian vessels. 500,000 people flee the country, but the Home Secretary rules out visa-free entry to the UK, citing security concerns. Also ahead, FIFA suspends both the Russian national and club teams from all international competition.
Hello, yeah, we've come to join the Ukrainian army, or whatever they're called.
And British volunteers offer themselves to Ukraine's military to join the fight here on the ground. Good evening from Kyiv. Tonight, as darkness fell here, the skyline was alight with explosions appearing to edge closer to the centre of this city. Air raid sirens have once again been sounding, urging families to find shelter underground once again. It comes on a day of attempted diplomacy. Peace talks were held on the border of Belarus and a rare emergency session of the UN General Assembly in New York. Meanwhile, new economic sanctions have also been announced by the UK as Moscow begins to feel the impact of global pressure to choose peace. Ukraine is under attack from the north, the east and the south. Some of the most intense fighting and bombardments have been around the capital Kyiv, in Chernihiv, Berdyansk, Kherson and Mariupol. In the second city, Kharkiv, there have been reports of dozens of people killed in Russian rocket attacks. From the nearby city of Dnipro, our correspondent John Sparks reports on the battle for Ukraine.
The Russian government says it's willing to negotiate, but the Russian military has decided to bomb. This is Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, as filmed through the windows of its residents. It shakes and it shudders under a fiery barrage. The attacks seem indiscriminate. The government says dozens of people have been killed. In the north, the city of Chernihiv has been targeted by artillery and by missile strikes too. A popular shopping center was hit and a residential building was partially destroyed. The Ukrainian government said there was an unknown number of casualties. In the south, the Russians have taken ground, securing the city hall in Berdyansk. But the community's residents did not cower. Instead, they faced the enemy and told them to go home. Such confrontations have been replicated around the country. As the attack on Ukraine intensifies, the parties met for talks on the border of Belarus. But there seems little prospect of success. The Russians began the day complaining the Ukrainians were late. We've been waiting all night to talk while their civilians are dying, said their delegation's head. The besooted Russians, here on the left, said little about their aims, while the Ukrainians have demanded an immediate ceasefire. Their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, seeks salvation in the West and sees his country's future in the EU.
Звертаємось до Європейського Союзу.
We asked the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately under a new special procedure. We are grateful to our partners for fighting with us, but our goal is to be together with all Europeans.
Later, he signed an application for membership and posted it online. As the Russians press forward, the Ukrainians sign up, here registering for the army in the city of Dnipro. We were asked not to show their faces. So many people have put themselves forward, the authorities are turning them away. Many are now making Molotov cocktails instead. Their commander says he's inspired.
Піднесення і любов до своєї України. І вдячність країнам Євросоюзу, Сполученим Штатам Америки, Великої Британії. Раніше вони тільки озабоченість велика, зараз це конкретна допомога. Дякуємо.
The station in Lviv, in western Ukraine, now stands as a beacon of sorts, offering passage to Poland by train. And tens of thousands want a seat.
Sooner or late, everything could come, so me and my kids and my mom, we are going to travel to Poland first. I don't know which way now. We're gonna try because it's really hard to do now, and then we're gonna go to Germany.
It is a difficult journey, fueled by anxiety and disbelief, and their return beset by uncertainty. It takes courage to stay put in cities like Kyiv as the Russians deploy the might of their military machine. They will not sleep in the Ukrainian capital, but the majority seem prepared to defend it. John Sparks, Sky News in Ukraine.
Well, doctors have turned an area of this city's main children's hospital into an emergency department for victims of Putin's war. 3 children have so far been brought to the facility with gunshot injuries. One of the patients, a 10-year-old boy, died en route after his ambulance came under fire. From here in the capital, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, reports on the children of Kyiv.
The trauma of war in a children's hospital. This boy was hit by gunfire as Russian forces advanced on Ukraine's capital. Just 14 years old, he suffered face, back and leg wounds 3 nights ago. His latest procedure described as minor surgery. Russia's invasion prompted medics to set up this makeshift emergency department. 3 children have been brought in so far, including a 10-year-old who died en route.
That was the quiet place with just kids, with the scheduled operations, and now in one moment it changes. So okay, this is war. We are and 2 days ago we have the gunfights all around the block with the artillery fights, etc., etc. But this night was a little bit calm. So and the war changes the priority. So now, if you can take a shower and take a coffee, it is luxury.
He's barely slept. As well as preparing to treat war casualties, he and his colleagues have an equally vital job to do.
Here in the emergency department, the doctors are tired. They're worried about an influx of more patients, and they're also worried about what to do with the very sick children who are being treated in this hospital before the war started.
The lights are off because of we should be like nobody should see us. So we without light.
4-year-old Nikita has leukemia. He receives chemotherapy and blood transfusions here.
But usually children should not be in the corridor.
The noise you can hear is his teeth grinding. Something he's done since Russian missiles started falling. This is where he should be treated. But his mother now has to shuttle up and down from the basement, where it's safer for them to stay.
How are you feeling dealing with all of this? I'm sorry to ask.
You know, trembling, hands are trembling, legs are like you are in fitness gym, because downstairs 10,000 meters a day, steps a day, up and down with children, with bags.
She wants to take him out of the country, but it's hard.
Our children can't live without hospital, without medical treatment. You know, it's just a few days and that's all. So we should, if we will go to another country, we should cross the border, but with a doctor.
They're not alone. Other poorly children also stuck in limbo, fighting life-threatening diseases in the middle of a war zone. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
And we'll be talking to Deborah in just a moment, but satellite imagery is being keenly monitored in this conflict as Russian troops advance through Ukraine. We can show you some of the latest images we've received today. These Maxar images show Russian ground forces in an area to the north of here in Kyiv. Yesterday, the convoy was seen around 45 miles away from the capital. Today, rather closer, 17 miles from the city centre. It's also grown in size from just over 3 miles in length to 17 miles long today. Those pictures of the Russian ground force, the Russian convoy, heading slowly towards this capital city. And as I was saying, Deborah joins me now. I mean, heartbreaking scenes in that hospital. But just more broadly, we've seen explosions on the outskirts here today. We've seen intense firefights and shelling in Kharkiv. What is happening? What is more broadly the situation here?
Well, I think for Kyiv, it was noticeable, wasn't it? Those blasts that we heard an hour or so ago, which one of our cameramen, Dean, caught on camera. It was the closest blast from where we are in the centre. The windows rattled of the hotel, and it did feel pretty ominous. And those images that you were just talking about, the satellite images of this relentless Russian force growing and coming closer, it's pretty sobering. I think what you can say, looking at how the war has played out today, the intensity of the firepower that Russia is now deploying, not just here in Kyiv, but also, you mentioned Kharkiv and other cities have come under significant artillery rocket fire. In Kharkiv, there was extraordinary images that we've seen of the damage that was inflicted there. And it really is a sign, it seems, that Russia perhaps thought it could achieve its objectives here pretty quickly and swiftly with a limited force. However, it met significant resistance that has surprised Russia, definitely surprised Western allies. And so therefore you're seeing, as Western officials have predicted, an escalation in the lethal force used, in the indiscriminate nature of the weapons that are being deployed too, which means, of course, as always in war, the civilians pay the highest price. Civilians here in Kyiv, those who haven't chosen to leave, living now in underground stations, car parks, basements, very infrequently daring to come to the surface. The streets almost empty, people only coming out to get shopping. It's an eerie, sinister situation, and it's clearly something that's going to get worse. We have seen Russian military action inflicted on other cities. It has yet come to the centre of Kyiv, and you can only imagine that is what's going to come next.
And the talks that have been going on up on the border with Belarus, Ukrainian delegation meeting a Russian delegation. I mean, do we set any, store by that? Any chance of that producing anything?
Yeah, wars always end, don't they? Ultimately, through an agreement to a ceasefire. So the fact that the two sides have agreed to talk is something. But yes, it has achieved nothing. Russia, while it clearly has the military advantage on the ground here in Ukraine in terms of the firepower that it has, it has also been left reeling by the significant Western response to its invasion here. I don't think anyone imagined, including on the West, that the EU, for example, the US, the UK, they would all come together in such a way. The fact that EU airspace is now blocked to Russian planes, the fact that Russian banks are no longer able to use international payment systems, the fact that Germany has reversed a policy for years in terms of its defence spending, and also agreeing to fund and deliver weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces. That probably will come too late. However, it's a huge pushback by the West and a signal of their absolute abhorrence to what's going on here.
Yeah, huge changes in foreign policy across...
and I guess on the nuclear thing, we should talk just mention that. I mean, that is it's Vladimir Putin. He has had this unprecedented response from the West to his actions here, and rather than back down, he's escalating further. It's escalate to de-escalate is the theory, but escalating further by mentioning the mere mention of nuclear weapons, putting his nuclear forces on high alert. That is, it's a very serious. Worrying step, and for the West having to deal with that kind of policy move with nuclear weapons, the ultimate weapon, it's incredibly sobering.
Yeah, and it's still difficult to believe it's all going on. Deborah, thank you very much indeed. Well, crisis talks on the situation stepped up today with an emergency session of the UN General Assembly taking place in New York, the first of its kind in 40 years or so. It's also been announced tonight that the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, will travel to Geneva tomorrow. Our correspondent Sally Lockwood is in Washington. Alistair Bunkle is in Geneva. And Sally, we'll go to you first. And, well, this is a rare meeting, emergency meeting, and a powerful speech from the Ukrainian ambassador.
Yes, that's right, Mark. As you say, just the 11th UN General Assembly emergency session of its kind since 1950. And we heard from the Ukrainian representative once again, who spoke very emotionally, comparing Russia's actions by invading Ukraine to World War II and calling Vladimir Putin's threat of nuclear weapons, what madness, he said. Now, we also heard from the Russian representative, who had a rather different narrative, as you would expect, and once again peddled this message that they decided to take this action by invading Ukraine to clear genocide in the Donbass region, something, of course, that very few people at this stage would believe. But, of course, talks is what the US administration is keen to focus on, along with sanctions. Joe Biden spoke to representatives from NATO, members of the EU, the UK and Canada on the phone in a call in the last few hours about how to respond to this invasion in Ukraine and to continue to coordinate its response. Now, we've since heard from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who said that the US has decided it sees no reason to change its nuclear alert levels at this time. But we also need to be very clear-eyed about his own use of threats, speaking about Vladimir Putin there to MSNBC. Now, we've also heard from the Pentagon today. Now, they've said that they're still analysing and reviewing what Putin's announcement meant. But they say they haven't actually seen anything specific as a result of the direction that he gave, at least not yet, they said, in terms of putting their nuclear forces on high alert. Of course, Joe Biden had two options when Vladimir Putin made this announcement, to do the same and put US nuclear forces on high alert, or to choose to ignore it. And that is what we have seen from the US president so far, a very calm response, a sort of just strategic silence, if you like, over the weekend, but certainly something that they are continuing to monitor very closely here on this side of the Atlantic. US security officials knowing only too well how quickly this could escalate into a standoff between two superpowers.
Sally, thanks very much indeed. Alistair Bunkle is in Geneva. Alistair, Liz Truss heading there tomorrow. What do we expect from these talks?
You know, not a lot, I think, to be honest. That might sound pessimistic. Liz Truss will have meetings with her Danish, Czech, Polish counterparts. You know, let's not underestimate how important those meetings can be. You were speaking to Deborah about just how staggeringly effective the EU and America have collectively come together in their response to Russia, and a lot of that kind of hard work is done behind the scenes at forums like this. But the reason for my pessimism is that originally the expectation was that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken would be here, the UN Secretary General would be here, and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov would be here. Sergei Lavrov has cancelled his trip, citing the fact that Russian aircraft are banned from European airspace now. Antony Blinken won't attend in person, so I think any hopes that you might have the US Secretary of State meeting the Russian Foreign Minister behind closed doors and perhaps trying to thrash it out to get some sort of glimmer of a breakthrough, well, that isn't going to happen now. Liz Truss, yeah, she will be here, and that is part of the diplomatic push, but it doesn't have, I don't think, the key players, really, that it needs to have if we're going to find any kind of peace or breakthrough emanating from here, or at least the start of it.
OK, Alistair, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Russian central bank was forced to sharply raise its key interest rate to save the ruble from collapse after it dropped 30% against the US dollar. Diana Magnay joins us now from Moscow. And Diana, I mean, how concerned is Vladimir Putin as he watches his economy virtually collapse?
Well, he held an emergency economic meeting today where he called Western sanctions and what the West were doing. He described the West as the empire of lies, and essentially tried his best to look as though he will manage to mitigate, fend off these sanctions. But I'm really unsure as to whether he will. And the strange thing is that I think I've talked to you about this before, that Russia has always billed itself since 2014 as really fairly sanction-proofed, and it would always point to this huge $640 billion that it has in foreign reserves. And as it turns out, a lot of those foreign reserves are held in G7 countries. And now the United States has said that they will freeze the central bank's assets held abroad. And that many other countries will follow suit, which means that the central bank can't use any of that foreign currency to prop up the ruble, which is part of the reason why we've seen this free fall in the ruble. It went down 32% at one point, climbed back up to about a loss of 15%. But I think this is just the shape of things to come. And once again, this will impact the Russian people. And I went out today and talked to people who were worried about what was going to be happening to their money. And at this stage, let me say, there are not huge queues at every cash point. You know, there are people worried. The banks are busier than normal. We have seen social media videos of long queues in certain places, but it's not universal, because I think people are only beginning to wake up and hear the news that the currency is going down. So it will take quite a long time for them to sort of recognise and feel the economic impact, but that economic impact will be huge. You'll see prices in the shops rise, especially of imported goods. People who hold, for example, cards from Sberbank, which is the bank which most Russians bank with, that is now sanctioned. That means that if they go abroad, the piece of plastic that they have will be completely worthless. Their ruble will buy them very little if they do go abroad. So this is just the beginning of a set of sanctions, which I think will set Russia and Russian people back very considerably for the next couple of decades. And when you talk to people who are going out to the streets to protest against this war, they say, you know, this is going to ruin the future that we have. This will isolate us completely. This will make us into a sort of Iran or a North Korea compared to the opportunities that we did have. And I see no rowing back in terms of the sanctions. And in fact, we've just heard from the EU that some more names have been added to the sanctions list. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, also some of the big oligarchs, Mikhail Friedman, who heads up Alfa Bank. He, in fact, was born in Ukraine and wrote recently that war was never the right answer, but that hasn't stopped him being sanctioned. Also, Alisher Usmanov, who we know from his role at Arsenal, and various others. So I think that the EU, the US, the West have still further sanctions measures up their sleeve. And strangely, even though they said over and over again, if you invade Ukraine, Vladimir Putin, we will unleash full sanctions hell on you, I'm not sure that he took it really that seriously. And it's only day 5 of this terrible invasion, and already the economic impact is being felt back home.
Diana, thank you very much. And from Moscow, let's go over to Washington, live to the State Department, where there is a briefing going on. Let's listen in.
Earlier this year, in the aftermath of the summit meeting that President Putin had with President Biden in Geneva, it was in the aftermath of that engagement that our two countries again came out with a joint statement reaffirming something we have said since the Cold War, and that is that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Right. That is something that the Russian Federation has signed on to. It is something that we certainly believe, and it is a principle that we must protect and preserve.
Sure, but that was a while ago, and then they invaded.
So
then do you think that they're still within that understanding? Are the indications that you're getting is similar to what the Swiss are getting, that they're not going to follow through this high alert?
Well, clearly this is provocative rhetoric. We share the opinion with our partners and allies around the world that this sort of provocative rhetoric, more than being unnecessary, it is dangerous. It adds to the risk of miscalculation. It should be avoided. We are assessing President Putin's directive at this time. As I think you have heard us say, we see no reason to change our own alert levels. This gets back to the broader point. Throughout this crisis, while Russia was manufacturing it, and now that we are in the midst of this unjustified, premeditated, unprovoked invasion, we have seen the Russian Federation, the Kremlin, President Putin himself, consistently try to turn the tables by falsely alleging that it is Russia that is under threat, that Russia faced a threat from Ukraine, that Russia faced a threat from a defensive alliance, that Russia was the one that had no choice but to wage a brutal, premeditated, unprovoked, unjustified war against its neighbor. Neither we, nor NATO, nor Ukraine, nor any other country has any desire or intention for conflict with Russia. At the same time, we are unwavering in our commitment to extended deterrence and confident in our ability to defend ourselves and our allies. As you've heard us say, our commitment to Article 5 is just as strong today as it was at NATO's founding more than 70 years ago. Sir.
Thank you. Mark Stone from Sky News. Thanks, Ned. First of all, can you give us any sense of what your reading is of what President Putin meant yesterday? Is he talking about battlefield nuclear weapons, or was he talking about something even more frightening? That's my first question.
Look, I don't think it is wise or responsible for me to try to interpret, to try to read into what President Putin might have been signaling, trying to signal. Again, we think that this type of rhetoric is provocative, it is profoundly unhelpful, and it is at its core dangerous. We think it should be avoided.
So to follow up, what is your assessment of his state of mind, and how are you accessing that assessment? I mean, are conversations like that with Naftali Bennett of Israel yesterday and Emmanuel Macron, are they helpful? What are the lines of communications to work out what's going on in his head?
Well, we are going to judge the Russian Federation. We are going to judge President Putin by his actions. And clearly his actions in recent days have justified and given us cause to justify precisely what we said we would do in the run-up to this unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. President Putin, his cronies, the Kremlin, those around them, they are facing the unprecedented set of economic and financial measures, just as we promised, not based on rhetoric, not based on threats alone, but based on their actions. When it comes to our engagement, look, here clearly our relationship with Russia and the world's relationship with Russia is different today than it was last week or than it was before this unprovoked crisis began late last year. But we still believe in diplomacy. We know that diplomacy is the only responsible, sustainable means by which to end this conflict. It is precisely why we are supporting our Ukrainian partners as they engage in those talks. Other countries around the world have continued to engage with the Russian Federation. If we need to engage with the Russian Federation, we have the ability to do so ourselves, whether it is through the State Department, whether it is through the Defense Department, whether it is through any other channel we have with the Russian Federation.
So the deconfliction lines are open in terms of with defense or with state, that they're there?
We have maintained deconfliction channels with the Russian Federation for the better part of a decade now. Again, we think that the ability to communicate clearly is in some ways even more important during times of crisis and conflict, as we are in now, than it otherwise would be. Yes, Kylie.
And just to put one more question too on the nuclear deterrent aspect of this. What has happened to Russia's nuclear arsenal since Putin said over the weekend that they would be putting their nuclear deterrent forces on alert?
Again, we are not in a position to characterize anything the Russians might have done. You'll have to ask them if President Putin's rhetoric was matched by any sort of action. We have had no change in our posture at this time. We don't judge there is any need for a change.
Okay, and then after the talks today between the Ukrainians and the Russians, they announced that they'd have another round in a few days. Do you have a response to that? And do you think that the continuation of talks is any reflection of how Russia feels about its military advances in Ukraine?
Well, as I said before, we support Ukraine in its efforts to find a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. Ukraine sought before the onset of this invasion to do just that. The United States sought before the onset of this invasion to do just that. Our allies in Europe sought before this invasion to do just that. The OSCE sought to do just that. The NATO-Russia Council sought to do just that. At every turn, the Russian Federation rejected those offers of substantive, constructive engagement. Now that the invasion, we are in the midst of an invasion, we have heard this very message from President Zelensky, from Foreign Minister Kuleba. You would be right to color us skeptical of what it is that Moscow intends. What we've said before, including last week, applies equally today. Diplomacy at the barrel of a gun, diplomacy at the turret of a tank, that is not real diplomacy. We are ready and willing, just as our Ukrainian partners are, just as our European allies are, to engage in real, in substantive, in genuine diplomacy in order to see if we can find a way out of what is a needless, brutal conflict. But that diplomacy is highly unlikely to bear fruit, to prove effective, in the midst of not only confrontation, but escalation. Well before the invasion started, we made the point that we were all for diplomacy. But in order for it to bear fruit, it needed to take place in the context of de-escalation. That is, in some ways, even more true now. We are supportive of the Ukrainians engaging with Russian counterparts. We are offering, as you know, Foreign Minister Kuleba had an opportunity yesterday to convene with the G7 ministers. President Biden has had an opportunity in recent days to speak to President Zelensky has an opportunity in recent days to speak to President Biden. Secretary Blinken has had several conversations with Foreign Minister Kuleba on a bilateral basis in any number of days. So we are comparing notes, we are coordinating closely, and we are supportive, knowing what we all assume are the limitations on diplomacy in the present context. It is precisely what Foreign Minister Kuleba and President Zelensky have spoken to. We share a sense of skepticism, but at the same time, we want to exhaust every potentially viable diplomatic avenue. Yes.
Well, there we are. We're going to leave the State Department there. Most of the questions are asked by Sky's Mark Stone, but nothing really new, just a restatement of condemnation of what Vladimir Putin is doing, and also saying that diplomacy was still possible, according to the Americans there. Now, the sporting world has waged a widespread boycott over the past week, implementing sanctions against teams, cancelling advertising campaigns and cutting ties with sponsors. And tonight, all Russian teams have been suspended from competing in global and European football competitions by FIFA and UEFA. Our sports correspondent, Tom Parminter, is at Wembley Stadium. And Tom, this is a highly significant move by the football authorities.
It is. These are authorities who have been very close to Vladimir Putin over the years. Indeed, Russia hosted the last World Cup in 2018. But this decision, I think, was somewhat inevitable given the backlash from so many nations who were queuing up to say that they simply would not play against any Russian sides. That FIFA, who had initially suggested that Russian teams may be able to continue playing under a different name with no national flag, well, that was just utterly unacceptable to so many people within the sport of football, and that has prompted the response tonight from UEFA and FIFA. In a joint statement, they said that FIFA and UEFA have today decided together that all Russian teams, whether national representative teams or club teams, shall be suspended from participation in both FIFA and UEFA competitions until further notice. Football is fully united here and in full solidarity with all the people affected in Ukraine. Both presidents, that's UEFA and FIFA presidents, hope that the situation in Ukraine will improve significantly and rapidly so that football can again be a vector for unity and peace amongst people. So that means that Russia will effectively not take part in the playoffs for the Men's World Cup, which are due to be happening next month in March. We also have real serious doubts now as to whether there'll be a Russian team in the Women's Euros competition hosted here in England, with the final here at Wembley. So a major move from the football authorities and also from the Olympic organisers today, who have said that Russian and Belarusian athletes should not be taking part in international competition.
OK, Tom, thanks very much indeed. Let's go over to New York now, where the United Nations General Assembly is holding this emergency meeting, and the Russian ambassador to the UN is taking some questions.
Regime against its own people who protested and who were opposed to what the Maidan regime was trying to implement. For 8 years, we've been trying, unfortunately in vain, to make Ukrainian authorities to comply with the Minsk agreements, and we went out of the way to do so. But from day one, after 2015 in particular, the Ukrainian authorities opted to sabotage first, and then simply to deny and to cancel, to abandon and to cancel their commitments under the Minsk agreements. Before that, they were trying to navigate, so to say, within Minsk agreements, trying to make them the way which suited them, but then it became obvious nothing works. And then in February, in January and February 2022, when the West started to beef up Ukrainian state with lethal weapons, when Ukrainian authorities amassed 120,000 servicemen at the border of the contact line with Donbass, and when they upscaled their provocations against Donbass, shelling and killing people again, we realized that that leads us nowhere. and that's why President Putin took the decision to recognize Donetsk and Lugansk republics and to offer them within the treaty that we concluded with them military assistance. And that's why we started this military operation in Donbass and in Ukraine, which, as I said today in the General Assembly, was not the war started by us. This is the end of war that was started by Ukraine. I think that I think that you all know that we many times we said that we were not planning military operation in Donbass unless Ukrainian military, Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian military would directly threat those republics, which was the case, and we have credible information that the military operation was planned, and that was a move that was inevitable in these circumstances.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. There have been some reports out of the border meeting in Belarus between Russia and Ukraine. What is it, in your view, that would bring peace to Ukraine and withdrawal of Russian forces? What is that? And then a little follow-up to Valeria's question. Country after country are coming to the General Assembly podium and supporting Ukraine, feeling that Russia is the aggressor. What is your view of that, if not isolation? Thank you so much.
Okay. What will bring peace to Ukraine? We clearly said, and that is demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, which creates a clear and immediate danger to us, also within the context of geopolitical stability, because as President Putin said, that if not today or tomorrow, one day in 30 or 50 years, Ukraine might and will perhaps become a NATO member. That will move NATO to the Russian border, and that will be an existential threat for us. And that is something that we will not allow to happen. What will bring peace to Ukraine unanswered? I answered on the talks that were held on the border of Ukraine and Belarus were finished at this stage. The result, the details of that are not known to me, but I know that there was a decision to continue those talks. When and where, I do not know yet. Perhaps in the same place.
But there was some report that there was common ground. Did you hear of any common ground, or what it might be?
I don't know the details, as I said, but I know that today President Putin spoke to President Macron, and he listed those conditions that we demand from Ukrainians. And they are well known, as I said, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, commitment to its neutral status, not to join NATO, and not to move weapons to our borders. I did not answer one question that Michelle posed to me, which is about reports about 100 civilians dead. There are a lot of reports today, and I said that there are a lot of fake news, there are a lot of fake factories that produce those news. We do not have credible reports on civilian casualties. Of course, war is a bad thing, and anything can happen. But to call this, to consider those reports credible, is very difficult, since we are witnessing and we are encountering massive propaganda campaign. Using, as I said, troll factories that produce those news, to which we referred to in our recent statements on numerous occasions.
So you just referred to this as war. This is now war?
This is a special military operation, which is commonly called. I wouldn't call it a war, because war means an outright military hostilities, but as you know, we announced it and we maintain it that we are only targeting military objects in Ukraine. We do not target any civilian infrastructure, nor the cities as they report.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sherman Briceby, South African Broadcasting. Can you talk about your relationship with the Secretary General, right? We saw you in the General Assembly on Wednesday. You had a very animated discussion. We couldn't read lips, but we certainly saw the body language. There's been a lot of criticism. And the UN argues that essentially all he's doing is defending the UN Charter that says states must settle their disputes through peaceful means, which is not happening here. So that's one issue. What should the SG do in this instance? And in addition to that, this notion of the denazification of Ukraine. Ukraine has a Jewish president. So it just beggars belief that you are talking about Nazis in removing Nazis in Ukraine when the president himself is a Jew.
There was a criticism on my part, on our part, of the Secretary General for the position he took on the crisis. I do not recall, as I said, to him directly and out loud that he took similar positions in similar cases, and there were many, in fact. Syria, take other examples. There were many where his position was much more subdued, but there was no body language, rest assured. That was a criticism within the diplomatic protocol, which I think I didn't overstep. On the fact that Zelensky has Jewish heritage, it doesn't matter because real power in Ukraine, real political weight, belongs to the radicals and neo-Nazis who defy the president, who have their own agenda, who rule the ball in Ukraine, in fact. And President Zelensky, who came with a landslide victory of 74% of the population, promising to end the war. First thing on the list of his priorities. But then he was slowly backing off this, and he finished practically playing into the hands of those radical and neo-Nazi organizations, which claim that they represent the patriotic part of the Ukrainian society. He demonstrated that he's weak, that he has no political will and power in the circumstances he found himself in to resist those radicals who are the main political driving force in today's Ukraine.
Well, there we are. That's the Russian ambassador blaming Ukraine for the conflict. He blamed Ukrainian provocations and mass killing in Donbass. He said, this is not a war started by us, Russia. It was started by Ukraine. I mean, whether he believes that or not, he said it. And then he said, war is a bad thing and anything can happen. So the Russian ambassador there at the UN justifying or trying to justify what is happening here in Ukraine. Well, joining me to discuss those latest developments are two former Western diplomats, the former ambassador and UK National Security Advisor, Lord Darrach, Kim Darrach, and a former United States permanent representative to NATO, Kurt Volker. Thank you very much for being with us. And Lord Darrach, just first of all, I don't know whether you heard what the Russian ambassador was saying, but basically saying this is all Ukraine's doing.
Yeah, it was a fantasy version of history or of current affairs, if you like, Mark. And I don't think it carries any credibility with anyone in the West, or one would hope, elsewhere. It's the sort of message which is being pumped out to the Russian people. I don't know whether they believe it or whether they believe what those who can pick up what the West is saying, whether they believe us. But it is one of the more classic cases of disinformation and straight lying that you can imagine.
And Kurt Volker, what do you think Vladimir Putin's strategy is now that things are starting to not go so well for him in Ukraine and the sanctions are biting? I mean, does he have a strategy anymore?
Well, he's doubling down right now. He's
moving in additional military forces. He's laying siege to civilian populations, attacking apartment buildings and hitting civilians in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, in Kyiv. He called the Ukrainian negotiating team to Belarus today to see whether he could get them to surrender. Of course, they refused. As you say, it's not going well for him on the ground, but they are spending yesterday and today trying to repair some of their logistical supplies, their fuel supplies, and they're going to be hitting Ukraine very hard again tonight, tomorrow night. And his strategy, if you have it, is simply to try to prevail militarily. He's losing face, and the only way he doesn't lose face is if he actually wins. I think this is going, however, to turn out better for the Ukrainians, and Putin is going to look very bad at this, including in Russian eyes.
And Lord Darroch, the sanctions are biting, the ruble is plummeting. Does Vladimir Putin care at all about that?
Well, it cannot have been part of his plan, Mark, that after 30 years of Germany's allies trying to persuade Germany to spend 2% of GDP on defence, they've just announced they will, that the ruble is crashing, that they've had to put interest rates up to 20%, that Russian banks are being excluded from the SWIFT system. So the sanctions are certainly going to have an impact on ordinary Russians. And to the extent that there is already, and there's some evidence of this, disquiet amongst the Russian people about what is happening, when they can't get money out of ATMs and when it feels as if there's a run on Russian banks, then that will really hit home. So sanctions are certainly hurting. Just one very quick point. Britain's USP is London as one of the largest financial centres in the world. So it is crucial that we carry through what the Foreign Secretary and others have promised today, which is to try and drain the swamp of Russian money in London and hit the Russian banking community as hard as is possible, as well as Russian oligarchs who've salted away money here.
And Kurt Volker, I mean, how do you think Vladimir Putin will emerge from all this? Will he be so badly damaged that his time could be up, or is that unthinkable given his sort of all-powerful position?
No, I think it is quite thinkable. Lord Darroch already mentioned the Russian public showing signs of disquiet. I would not at all be surprised to learn that there is disquiet in the Russian military and Russian intelligence circles as well, because Putin is leading his country to ruin. And that is certainly not something that they want. So I think there are two possible scenarios at this stage. One of them is the Russian forces continue to get bogged down. They don't succeed. The economic sanctions bite. It hurts Russia dramatically, and people move to remove Putin. The other is that he actually manages to crush the Ukrainian military, so the Ukrainian public go into a resistance mode. This will make Russia a pariah globally for years and years to come. This will also do great damage to Russia, but under that circumstance, one can imagine the potential for Putin hanging on.
And Lord Darroch, if that happens and the government here is removed, should the West and the British government, the US government support and finance a government in exile and maybe even a military in exile planning to take it back?
Well, the most worrying news in a sense today is the fact that despite heavy and extraordinarily courageous Ukrainian resistance, the Russian forces have got that bit closer to Kyiv. I think they're now, is it 30 miles away? And they can bring overwhelming force to bear, including overwhelming air power. So it may be, as Kurt has just said, that ultimately they will be able to take Kyiv, although advancing on the city is a different thing from taking the city, and it's extraordinarily difficult to actually take a large urban area like Kyiv. If that does happen, yes, of course we should offer sanctuary to the Ukrainian government. I think, Kurt will know this, but I think the American government's already offered that, and I think we would want to make the offer if it was necessary. Yes.
And just finally, Kurt Volker, I mean, do you see a kind of long, whatever happens here, if he does take over the government, topple the government, you can't really tame a people. Do you see a long, protracted, messy war of resistance?
Or quite determined. The government has handed out assault rifles to the population. And I've seen pictures of friends, former government ministers, who have their assault rifles and they are ready to go fight. So I think this will be very difficult for Russia to hold, even if they're able to take. And so this will be a bloody, awful, and protracted conflict for Russia, which in the end, I believe Ukrainians will win. And that's because there is no taking away from them their sense of identity, their sense of needing to live in a democracy, their sense of being European. So they will continue to resist in every way possible. And that is essential. That's why it's essential we do everything we can to assist them right now. Before any government is defeated, before any military is defeated, get them the arms, get them the logistical support, consider a no-fly zone. I know it's controversial, but it needs to be looked at. But everything that can be done to help them get through this. If they make it another week or so, I think the tide may begin to turn against Russia.
Okay, Kurt Volker and Lord Darrett, thank you both very much indeed. So what is the picture here? It's been another day of heavy fighting, more intense bombardment of Kyiv, the second largest city. Also explosions here in Kyiv on the 5th day of the Russian invasion. This is Sky News. Coming up in the next hour. We'll have much more reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We'll be talking to the envoy to the United Nations as he warns that his country may not survive.
It's 8 o'clock. This is Sky News Tonight. The top story, large explosions close to the Ukrainian capital on day 5 of the Russian invasion. A barrage of blasts hit major cities in Ukraine, killing dozens as the Russian assault on the country intensifies. In Kyiv's main children's hospital, Sky News witnesses children being treated for gunshot wounds as doctors move cancer patients to the basement. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia held on the Belarus border while a war of words erupts between them at the United Nations. Western sanctions begin to bite in Russia as the UK government ratchet up their response, directing all ports to deny access to Russian vessels. 500,000 people flee the country, but the Home Secretary rules out visa-free entry to the UK, citing security concerns. Also ahead, FIFA suspends both the Russian national and club teams from all international competition.
Hello, yeah, we've come to join the Ukrainian army or whatever they're called.
And British volunteers offer themselves to Ukraine's military to join the fight on the ground. Good evening. Tonight, as darkness fell in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, the skyline was alight with explosions, appearing to edge closer to the center of the city.